Some moments in life don't arrive with thunder. They sneak in quietly, disguised as ordinary days. That was the case the night I realized just how far disrespect could stretch inside my own family. I was 68 years old, sitting at the oak dining table in my little house in Clearwater Ridge, rubbing the stiffness out of my hands after another long shift at the repair yard. The place was quiet, steady, familiar. For years it had been my anchor. My wife died almost a decade ago, and since then I'd tried to keep life simple, routine, predictable, without unnecessary conflict. But people have a way of reshaping the life you think you've built, especially the people you love. Before anything else happens, before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. My son Avery had recently moved back into town after spending several years working tech jobs across different cities. He was 32 now, older than I ever imagined him being when he left my home as a restless, wide-eyed teenager. I thought he was finally settling down, finally letting the roots of home take hold. But he didn't come alone. He brought with him his boyfriend, a 32-year-old man named Damon. Sharp jawline, sharper voice, and an ego that walked into every room 3 steps ahead of him. From the first moment we met, we clashed. Not loudly, but in those quiet, subtle ways men do when they're testing the edges of each other. Still, I bit my tongue. Avery seemed happy. That mattered more than my discomfort. For a while. That evening they came over for dinner. My son had always liked my roasted herb chicken, so I made it the way he liked. Slow roasted, seasoned with thyme, lemon, and garlic. The house smelled warm by the time they arrived. But the warmth didn't last. Avery stepped inside with a quick hug, but Damon barely acknowledged me. He brushed past like my doorway was beneath him, muttering something about how quaint the place looked. I tried to let it slide. Not every man is raised to respect another's home. We sat down to eat. The clinking of cutlery filling the silence Avery kept trying to smooth over with small talk. Damon, on the other hand, seemed determined to poke at everything he could. My house, my cooking, my old-fashioned way of thinking. It was like he couldn't stand the idea of someone my age having boundaries. "Do you still work that dusty job at the yard?" he asked between bites, smirking just enough to be disrespectful. I nodded calmly. "Yes, pays my bills, keeps me busy." He scoffed. "Thought people your age stayed out of the way." Avery shot him a warning glare, but Damon didn't care. He never seemed to care. I kept my voice even. "People my age built the things you stand on." He rolled his eyes so hard I thought he'd pull something. The rest of the dinner simmered with tension, but it wasn't until later, when they were about to leave, that lines were crossed. Avery stepped outside to warm up the car. I stayed near the door, seeing them off. Damon lingered in the hallway with me, standing too close, arms crossed, wearing that same expression he always did, like the world owed him comfort. "You know," he said quietly, "Avery only comes here because he feels guilty. Says it all the time, that his dad's lonely and fragile." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were true, but because they came from someone who had no right to speak them. I breathed in slowly. "You don't know a thing about me." He stepped closer, invading my space with deliberate intention. "I know weak when I see it." And then he put his hand on my chest, flat, dismissive, shoving just enough to send me back one step. Something changed in me right then. Not rage, not fear. Something quieter, heavier, like a door closing on the last bit of patience I had left. I straightened, looked him dead in the eyes, and said nothing. Silence can cut deeper than any threat. Avery called out from the driveway, breaking the tension. Damon stepped back, smirking like he'd won something. But he didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of when pushed far enough, and he certainly didn't know what that shove had awakened, because that small shove in my hallway was the spark. And by the next night I would show him exactly what a 68-year-old man could do when disrespected in his own home. The house felt quieter after they left, but not in the peaceful way it usually did. It was the kind of silence that carries an echo of words, of disrespect, of something unfinished. I stood in the hallway for a long time after the door closed, my hand resting on the spot where Damon had shoved me. Not because it hurt physically, but because of what it meant. A man can live 68 years and still be stunned by how casual cruelty can be. I walked to the kitchen. rinsed the plates trying to settle my breathing, but my mind kept replaying that moment. The smirk, the shove, the look in his eyes that said he thought he'd discovered a weakness in me. Maybe he had, but not the one he thought. I sat down at the table with a cup of tea, the steam rising in gentle coils. My son had dated other men before. Some kind, some difficult, but none had tried to assert dominance in my home. Damon hadn't just crossed a line. He had dragged his foot across it like he owned the ground. The longer I sat there, the more a quiet resolve settled into my bones. The next morning I went about my routine as usual. I had no interest in starting a war. I wasn't a young man fueled by impulse. Age had cooled that fire, sharpened my thinking, made me choose my battles with precision. But what Damon didn't understand was this: men my age don't lose their strength. We just learn when to show it. Around midday, Avery called. "Dad, about last night." "I'm sorry," he said, voice tight with embarrassment. "Damon gets defensive sometimes. He didn't mean—" "He did," I interrupted calmly. "And that's all right. He showed me who he is." Silence stretched over the line. "Dad," Avery tried again, "he's just struggling with some things." I softened my tone. "I know you care about him, and I don't want to come between you two." I meant that, truly. But protecting my son didn't mean tolerating disrespect from the man he lived with. After we hung up, I stepped outside to clear my mind. The afternoon sun hit the fence, casting long shadows across the yard. I stood there, hands in my pockets, breathing in the scent of pine and dry earth. And that's when I remembered something important. 2 years earlier, a stray dog had wandered into my yard, skinny, trembling, but mean enough to bite if cornered. My instinct had been to help, but I learned quickly: never approach something scared and aggressive with softness. Softness only teaches it your prey. You show steadiness. You show boundaries. Only then does the threat shrink. I didn't plan revenge. Revenge is messy, emotional, and usually ends worse than it begins, but correction? Teaching someone what they cannot do? That's something different entirely. Later that afternoon, Avery texted me. "Damon wants to apologize. Can we stop by tonight?" I stared at the message for a moment. Damon never struck me as the type to apologize out of genuine regret, but he was the type to apologize when he realized his behavior might cost him something: comfort, approval, or the illusion of control. "Of course," I replied. I began preparing dinner before they arrived. Something simple: pan-seared vegetables, roast potatoes, and a pot of stew that had been simmering since morning. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. Drama wasn't necessary. Clarity was. The knock came just after 6. Avery stepped in first, looking tense but hopeful. Damon followed, shoulders stiff, chin slightly raised, like he was trying to choose between humility and pride. He wore a fitted black jacket and a guarded expression. "Good to see you," I said warmly, offering a steady hand. Avery shook it. Damon didn't. That was the first mistake of the night. We sat at the table. The air was thick enough to taste. Avery attempted small talk, but it slid off Damon like rain on wax. Finally, Avery nudged him. "Go ahead," he whispered. Damon cleared his throat. "Look, about last night. Things got heated. I shouldn't have—" He paused, glanced at Avery, then continued. "I shouldn't have put my hands on you." It wasn't an apology. It was a statement someone forced out of him. I nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that." But Damon mistook my calm for surrender. He leaned back, folded his arms, and smirked again. The same smirk he'd worn when he pushed me. "So we're good then?" he asked, voice dripping with condescension. That was his second mistake, because he still had no idea what I had planned. He thought dinner meant forgiveness. But by the time the night ended, he would learn exactly what a 70-year-old man taught me when I was young: never disrespect someone in their own home. Dinner simmered quietly on the stove, filling the house with the rich scent of stew and herbs, the kind of scent that normally softened the edges of a hard day. But that evening, nothing softened. Not with Damon sitting across from me, arms crossed, staring like he was waiting for a performance. Avery kept glancing between us, anxiety written across his face. He loved this man. Love can blind even the sharpest minds. And he desperately wanted peace. I knew better than to expect it. I ladled stew into bowls, placing one in front of each of us. Damon didn't say thank you. He barely looked at the food. He just tapped his fingers on the table, restless and arrogant. A young man's impatience wrapped in the thin armor of ego. "You've got a nice spread," he finally said. "Didn't think you cooked anything that didn't come out of a can." Avery's face tightened. "Damon, it's all right," I said calmly, taking my seat. "Some people mistake quiet living for small living." Damon smirked. He thought that was a victory. We started eating. Though he mostly pushed food around with his spoon, I watched him. Not with anger. Anger wastes a man's energy, but with clear, steady eyes. My father used to say that a disrespectful man will always reveal himself in the space between his words. Damon proved that true every minute he breathed in my house. "So," Damon said, leaning forward, "Avery told me you used to be stronger. Must be rough getting old." "A lot of things are rough," I replied. "But wisdom doesn't come free." Damon gave a small laugh. "Wisdom? You let your own kid leave you alone in this dusty place. Doesn't sound wise to me." Avery went pale. "Damon, seriously, stop." But Damon wasn't speaking to Avery. He was speaking at me, testing the boundaries he thought he'd already broken with that shove the night before. I set my spoon down gently. "You don't have to stay," I said. "Either of you." Avery looked pained. Damon grinned like he'd won again. "No," Avery said quickly. "We're here because we want things to stop being weird." "Exactly," Damon added. "Everyone should just move on." There it was. The expectation that disrespect should be forgiven simply because time passes. I leaned back in my chair. "Moving on is easy," I said. "Learning is harder." Damon rolled his eyes. "Look, if this is going to be some kind of lecture—" "It isn't," I cut in. "But you should know something." The air in the room shifted, not dramatically, just enough. "When I was your age," I continued, "a man shoved me the way you did. Same arrogance, same smirk, same idea that older meant weaker." Damon's fingers stilled. "And what happened?" he asked. I held his gaze. I taught him the one lesson he never forgot. "Respect is the only currency that doesn't run out." Damon scoffed, but his eyes betrayed the first flicker of uncertainty. He didn't know whether I was bluffing. He didn't know whether the lesson would be verbal, physical, or something else entirely. He only knew the tone of a man who wasn't bluffing. The silence stretched long enough for Avery to shift uncomfortably. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we please not?" "This isn't about fighting," I said gently. "It's about understanding." Then I looked back at Damon. "You think I'm old," I said. "Fair. You think I'm fragile, also fair, but you made one mistake." He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What's that?" "You assumed age means helplessness." For the first time since he entered my house, Damon didn't have a comeback. He swallowed, barely noticeable, but enough to reveal he finally felt the weight of the room and the weight of his choices. "I didn't mean—" he began. "You did," I said, letting my voice remain soft, steady. "And that's why you're here. Because apologies aren't words. They're shifts. They're behavior. They're recognition." He looked away. He wasn't ready to say he understood, but for the first time he wasn't ready to challenge me either. We finished dinner in a quiet that didn't feel forced. It felt waiting. After we cleared the dishes, Damon rose first, hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. Avery hugged me goodbye, tight and uncertain. But Damon paused at the door. Not long. Just enough to show something had changed. Or so I thought, because the next night revealed a truth I didn't expect. A truth Damon had been hiding, and one that would drag our conflict into a place neither of us could ignore. Because when I opened my door 24 hours later, I didn't find Damon ready to apologize. I found the consequences of his actions showing up before he could. The next evening arrived quiet and cool. The kind of evening where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I wasn't expecting visitors. I wasn't expecting anything at all, really. I'd spent most of the day fixing a loose gate outside and trying to convince myself that Damon's behavior had settled, that maybe the young man had absorbed at least one sliver of humility. But arrogance rarely dissolves overnight. I was washing up after dinner when someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps, urgent, uneven, not the kind a person uses when they're feeling polite. I dried my hands and walked to the entryway. When I opened the door, it wasn't Damon and it wasn't Avery, it was a stranger. A skinny man in his early 30s stood on my porch, breathing hard, eyes darting around the yard as if someone had followed him there. He wore a wrinkled jacket, muddy shoes, and an expression that told me he wasn't here by choice but by desperation. Are you— He paused to catch his breath. Are you Avery's father? My pulse tightened. Who's asking? My name is Jordan, he said quickly, and I need to talk to you. It's about Damon. I stepped aside and motioned him in. He hesitated, fearful, uncertain, then crossed the threshold and stood in my living room, shifting his weight from foot to foot. What happened? I asked. Is he all right? Jordan let out a shaky breath. Depends on what you call all right. He looked around the room as if trying to decide whether he was truly safe here. His hands trembled slightly. Whatever brought him to my door wasn't small. Sit, I said gently. He sat, and then he told me something I didn't expect. I used to date Damon, he said, voice barely above a whisper. A few years back before he met your son. I kept my expression neutral. Go on. He wasn't always like he is now, Jordan said, but he always had edges. He didn't know how to lose. He didn't know how to be wrong. And when someone pushed back even a little, he'd snap. I felt a slow, cold shift in my gut. Last night, Jordan continued, Damon called me, drunk, ranting, angry. He said he messed up at your place. Said you embarrassed him in front of Avery. I frowned. I didn't embarrass him, I just told him the truth. I know, Jordan said. But Damon doesn't hear truth, he hears challenge. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. He said he was going to fix things. Said he wasn't going to let someone your age make him look weak. My jaw tightened. And what does that mean? I asked. Jordan swallowed. It means I think he's going to come back here. And not for an apology. Silence expanded in the room. Not fear, just clarity. I'd lived long enough to recognize when a situation was evolving from disrespect into something else. Damon wasn't just prideful, he was volatile. A man who had never felt consequences in his 32 years of life. A man who equated boundaries with threats. Jordan rubbed his hands together, eyes glistening. I didn't know who else to warn. I didn't want anyone getting hurt. Damon, he doesn't understand limits. Why come to me? I asked. Jordan's voice softened. Because you didn't back down. And he's not used to that. He stood slowly. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. I just thought you needed to know. I nodded. Thank you. Truly. Jordan left the same way he came. Nervous, quick, and glancing over his shoulder. When his footsteps disappeared down the walkway, I closed the door and locked it. Not because I was afraid, because I was preparing. I sat at the table, the same one Damon had leaned over the night before, and thought about everything Jordan said. If Damon was coming back, I needed to be ready, not to fight him, not to outmuscle him, but to show him what real strength looks like. Strength isn't shouting, strength isn't anger, strength is steady, measured, unshakable. And sometimes strength is simply refusing to let someone ruin the peace you earned through years of hardship. I was finishing a cup of tea when my phone buzzed, a message from Avery. Dad, Damon is furious. I'm sorry, I don't know what set him off. I'm trying to calm him down. My heart tightened, not in fear for myself, but for my son, because whatever Damon was planning, Avery would be caught in the middle. And that was one place I would never allow my child to stand, because less than an hour later, when I heard the roar of a car outside my house, I realized Damon wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to confront the wrong man. I heard the engine before I saw the headlights, an aggressive rev that didn't belong on my quiet street in Clearwater Ridge. I set my cup down and walked calmly to the front window. Outside, a dark sedan skidded to a stop at the curb, tires crunching gravel hard enough to echo through the night. The driver's door swung open. Damon stepped out. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't stumbling. He was fueled by something sharper, pride dressed as anger. The kind of anger a man uses when he feels outmatched and doesn't know what to do with the feeling. Avery climbed out from the passenger side a moment later, hurrying behind him, trying to stop him with words I couldn't hear. But Damon shook him off and marched straight toward my porch. I didn't move. I simply opened the door and waited. He stopped at the bottom step, chest heaving, jaw tight. So this is how it's gonna be? He demanded. You think you can talk to me like that? You think you can disrespect me in front of Avery? My voice stayed level. You came into my home and pushed me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten you. I didn't even ask for an apology. I asked for understanding. Understanding? He snapped. You're just a bitter old man who hates that your son's with someone stronger than you. Avery flinched. Damon, stop! But Damon was past listening. He stomped up the steps until he was right in front of me, his face inches from mine. His breath carried that familiar cocktail of ego and insecurity. I didn't back away. "You think because you've got a few decades on me, you get to judge everything I say?" he barked. "You think you can just command respect?" "No," I said. "Respect isn't commanded. It's earned." He scoffed loudly, turning his head as if the idea offended him. Then for the second time, he made the mistake that would change things. He grabbed my arm, not a full shove this time, something worse. A tight, possessive grip, like he believed he had the right to move me aside. In that moment, Avery stepped forward. "Damon, let go of him, now!" But Damon ignored him. I looked down at his hand. I didn't yank my arm back. I didn't push him, I just looked. And something about that stillness unsettled him. He loosened his grip, but didn't let go. "You're not gonna talk to me like that," he muttered. "Not in front of him, not ever." Then I did something simple, something quiet. I said, "Take your hand off me." It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. But the weight behind it, the authority, the steadiness, made his fingers twitch. But he still didn't let go. So I moved. Not fast, not violently. I simply twisted my arm the way an old foreman once taught me in my 20s. An old trick, harmless but effective. Damon's hand slid off mine instantly, and he stumbled back a step, caught off guard by how easily a man his senior could break his grip. Avery gasped. Damon's eyes went wide with shock. "What the?" he stammered. "How did you—" "I told you," I said calmly. "Age isn't weakness." He stared at me like he was trying to compute what happened, like the foundation he stood on had shifted without permission. His bravado cracked, the edges splitting into confusion and something that looked suspiciously like fear. Avery stepped between us, voice shaking. "Damon, please, this isn't right, this isn't normal." But Damon wasn't listening. He was too busy staring at me, seeing me clearly for the first time. "You embarrassed me," he whispered, voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "You made me look small." I shook my head. "No, you did that to yourself." He clenched his fists, shoulders rising with tension. For a moment I thought he might swing. But instead he did something far more revealing. His face collapsed and he whispered, "I can't lose him." Avery froze. I froze. Because beneath all that arrogance, beneath the temper and the pride, Damon was terrified. Terrified of losing control, terrified of losing Avery, terrified of becoming the man he had been before. Avery reached for him, voice soft. "Then you need to stop hurting people." Damon's breath hitched. He looked away, ashamed. I stepped back, giving them space. This wasn't about dominance anymore. This wasn't about winning. This was about a young man finally seeing the truth of himself and realizing he didn't like what stared back. Avery took his hand gently. "Let's talk inside." They walked past me, Damon quieter than I had ever seen him. But the night wasn't over, because inside my home, something was waiting. A truth Damon had hidden from Avery and from me. A truth that would turn this confrontation into something much deeper. Because just when I thought the anger was the problem, I found out what Damon had really been hiding and why he lashed out in the first place. Inside the house, the air felt dense, like whatever Damon had been carrying was finally about to surface. Avery guided him to the sofa while I turned on one of the warm floor lamps. Its glow softened the room, taking some of the sharpness out of the night, but not enough to erase the tension. Damon sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The man who had burst onto my porch full of fire and bravado looked nothing like the one sitting in front of me now. This version was smaller, not physically, but in the way someone looks when they've run out of excuses to hide behind. Avery knelt beside him, voice gentle. "Talk to us." "What's going on?" Damon didn't respond at first. His breathing was shallow, uneven. I recognized it, panic pressing against the edges of pride. Finally he spoke. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he whispered. Avery frowned. "Find out what?" Damon rubbed his face, then looked up with eyes that were suddenly glassy, vulnerable. "I lost my job 3 months ago." Avery's breath caught. "What? You told me everything was fine." "I lied," Damon said. "I kept lying. I couldn't admit I messed up again." I stayed quiet, letting them speak. My presence was important, but not intrusive. A man has to allow truth to settle where it lands. Avery touched his arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time something goes wrong in my life, people leave." Damon said, voice shaking. They say they won't at first, but they always do. I thought if I just acted like everything was under control, you wouldn't realize how much of a mess I am. His words hit harder than I expected. Anger is loud. Fear is quiet. And fear was all I heard in him now. Damon continued, when your dad told me off last night, it felt like someone else seeing the truth before you did. And I panicked. I thought, if he sees how weak I am, you'll see it too. Avery squeezed his hand. Hey, I'm not going anywhere. Damon shook his head. I didn't know that. I've never known that with anyone. There it was. The truth buried beneath every cruel word, every shove, every defensive outburst. He wasn't trying to dominate anyone. He was trying to protect the last piece of stability he had, even if he went about it the completely wrong way. Avery looked at me then, eyes full of worry. Not for himself, for Damon. Dad, he said softly. This is more serious than I realized. I pulled a chair closer and sat down. Son, people break in different ways. Some lash out because they don't know how to ask for help. Damon's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for the way I acted, for everything. This time it wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. The apology came from a place he rarely allowed anyone to see. I nodded. I accept that. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed but relieved. Then Avery asked the hardest question of the night. What do we do from here? For a moment, none of us spoke. The weight of the question hung between us. It wasn't just about the shove or the words or the anger. It was about what kind of men we were going to be after this conversation ended. So I answered the only way I knew how. We start over, I said, but with rules. Respect goes both ways. You don't raise your hands in anger, not at me, not at anyone. And you don't hide things from my son. Damon nodded quickly, almost desperately. I can do that. And, I continued, you get help. Not because you're broken, because you're worth fixing. Avery turned to him. I'll help you, he said quietly. But you have to let me. Damon looked between us, his expression softening in a way I hadn't seen before. Not defeat. Relief. Like he'd finally stopped running. The three of us sat in that quiet room, the weight of the night settling into something steadier, something almost hopeful. Conflict didn't vanish overnight. Respect didn't build itself in minutes, but a corner had been turned. And sometimes turning a corner is enough to begin rewriting the entire road. When Damon and Avery left later that night, the goodbye was different. Not tense, not cold, real. As I closed the door behind them, I felt something unexpected, peace. A rare kind, born not from winning a fight, but from choosing a better ending than the one anger tried to right. Because strength isn't in raising a hand, it's in raising a standard. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.